Welcome to the Atlas Theater presentation of the Screwtape letters. We're thrilled that you're here. We're going to have a brief announcement after the show, so do hang out after the curtain call. And we very much hope that you enjoy the show. To get us into the play tonight, I'm going to read from the preface to C.S. Lewis's Screwtape letters. In part, he writes this: devils are not engaged in the pursuit of something called evil. The capital E is essential. Bad angels, like bad men, are entirely practical. They have two motives. The first is fear of punishment. The second is a kind of hunger. I feign that devils can, in a spiritual sense, eat one another and us. We must picture hell as a state where everyone is perpetually concerned about his own dignity and advancement, where everyone has a grievance, and where everyone lives the deadly serious passions like envy, self-importance, and resentment. Devils are not connected through friendship. A being which can still love is not yet a devil. Instead, hell has an official society held together entirely by fear and greed, for of course dog eat dog is the principle of the whole organization, in which everyone wishes the discrediting, demotion, and ruin of everyone else. To those who share my opinion, my devils will be symbols of a concrete reality. To others, they will be personifications, and this play will be an allegory, but it makes little difference which way you go, for of course its purpose was not to speculate about diabolical life, but to throw light from a new angle on your life and mine. And that's C.S. Lewis, Magdalen College, Cambridge, May 1961. Let us begin with the toast. The scene is the annual dinner of the Tempter's Training College for Young Devils. Screwtape, a very experienced devil whose fame, I'm sure is known to all, has been invited to give an address.
Your Eminence, my thorns, shadies, and gentle devils, it is customary on these occasions for the speaker to address himself chiefly to those of you who have just graduated and await official posting to temptership on earth, a custom which I willingly obey. I remember with what trepidation I awaited my own posting, and I hope and believe that each of you feels that same sense of unease tonight. Your career is before you. Hell expects and demands that it is one, as mine was, of unbroken success, and if it is not, well, you know what awaits you. But now, the pleasantest part of my duties, it falls to my lot to propose on behalf of the Tempter's Training College a toast. Hold your glass high, and may the anguish of this human soul fill your belly deep. And now, I have the privilege of introducing you to your man, assigning you your task, and guiding you to make out of him the kind of meal the likes of which you will never have enjoyed. Some of you appear confused. You require further instruction. For those of such pitiful standing, pathetically minded, I will write soon. Be on the lookout for my letters. My dear Wormwood, now that you have been introduced to your position over your man, I note what you say about taking care to guide the patient's reading and making sure that he sees a great deal of his materialist friend. But are you not being a trifle naive? It seemed as if you supposed that an argument was the best way to keep him out of the enemy's clutches. This might have been true had the patient lived a few centuries earlier. At that time, human beings still knew pretty well when a thing was proved and when it was not, and were prepared to change their way of life as the result of a chain of reasoning. But thanks to the cable news and other such weapons, we have largely taken care of that. And ever since he was a boy, your man has been used to having a dozen incompatible philosophies dancing around together inside of his head. He no longer thinks of ideas as true or false, but as academic or practical, conventional or outdated, practical or ruthless. Jargon, not argument, is your best ally in keeping him from the church. Do not waste time trying to make him think that materialism is true or false. Instead, make him think that it is strong or stark or courageous, that it's the philosophy of the future. That's the sort of thing he really cares about. The trouble with argument is that it moves the whole struggle onto the enemy's own ground. He can argue too, whereas in really practical kinds of propaganda of the kind I am suggesting, the enemy has been shown for centuries to be greatly the inferior to our Father below. By the very act of arguing, you awaken the patient's reason. And once it has been awakened, who can foresee the results? And even if a train of thought can be twisted so that it still ends in our favor, you will find you have been strengthening in your patient the fatal habit of thinking of what is true and withdrawing his attention away from the stream of immediate sense experiences. Your business is to fix him on the stream. Teach him to call it real life and never let him ask what he means by real. Remember, he is not like you, a pure spirit. Having never been human, you don't realize how enslaved the humans are to the pressures of the ordinary. I once had a patient, a sound materialist, who used to read every morning in the British Museum. And one day, as he sat reading, I saw a train of thought in his mind beginning to go the wrong way. The enemy, of course, was at his elbow in an instant, and before I knew where I was, I saw my 20 years of work beginning to totter. Had I lost my head and attempted a defense by argument, I might have been undone, but I was not such a fool. I struck instantly at that part of the man which I knew I had best under my control and suggested it was just about time he had lunch. The enemy presumably made the counter-suggestion. You know how one can never quite overhear what he says to them, that this was more important than lunch. Or at least I assume that must have been his line, because by the time I had added, quite, in fact, far too important to go into at the end of a morning, the patient brightened up considerably. And by the time I had added far better to go into it after lunch and come back to it with a fresh mind, the patient was already halfway out the door. Once he was on the street, the battle had been won. He began to check his social media, brushed past a few street people, and before he reached the end of the steps, I had gotten into him the conviction that
whatever odd ideas might come into a man's head when he's shut up alone with his books, a healthy dose of real life,
by which he meant the Facebooks and the hipsters,
is enough to show me that this sort of thing just couldn't be true.
He knew he'd had a narrow miss, and in later years was fond of talking about
That practical desire for what we can see, which is a safeguard against the fog of mere logic.
he is now safe in our Father's house. You begin to see the point. Thanks to processes which we set at work in them centuries ago, they find it all but impossible to believe in the unfamiliar when the familiar is before their eyes. Keep pressing home on him the ordinariness of things. Give him a grand general idea that he knows it all, and anything he happens to pick up online is the result of modern scientific research. And above all, never use science as a defense against Christianity. That will only encourage him to think about realities that he cannot touch or see. Do remember, it is our job to fuddle them. The way some of you young fiends talk, many would assume it was our job to teach. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. My dear Wormwood, I note with grave displeasure that your patient has become a Christian. Do not indulge the hope that you will escape the usual penalties. Indeed, in your better moments, I trust you would hardly even wish to do so. And in the meantime, we must make the best of the situation. There is no need for despair. Hundreds of these adult converts have been reclaimed after only a brief sojourn in the enemy's camp and are now back with us. One of the greatest allies at present is the church itself. Do not misunderstand me. I don't mean the church as we see her, spread but throughout all time and space, rooted in eternity, terrible as an army with banners. That is a sight which I confess makes even our boldest tempters begin to tremble. But fortunately, it is quite invisible to humans. All your patient sees when he attends a Sunday gathering is the cheap, Walmart-inspired theater space. As he goes inside, he sees the local school teacher with a rather oily expression bustle up to offer him a handshake and a humiliating greeting spoken in a religiously tainted language which no one uses except when they're pretending to be holy.
Good morning, brothers. Isn't it a wonderful day to be in the presence of the Lord?
As your man takes his seat and looks around, he sees just that selection of his neighbors whom he has hitherto avoided. You'll want to lean pretty heavily on those neighbors, make his mind flit to and fro between expressions like the body of Christ and the actual faces in the next row. Now, it matters very little what sort of people the next row actually contains. You might know one of them to be a great warrior in the enemy's camp. No matter, your patient, thanks to our Father below, is a fool, and provided any of them have boots that squeak, sing out of tune, or ridiculous clothes, your patient will have no trouble believing that their religion is ridiculous. At present, you see, he has an image in his mind of Christians which he believes to be quite spiritual, but is in fact largely pictures from old books. His mind is filled with images of togas and sandals and bare legs. And the mere fact that the other people in the next row wear modern clothes is a real, though of course, an unconscious difficulty for him. Never let it come to the surface. Never let him ask what he expected them to look like. Keep everything in his mind hazy now, and you will have all eternity in which to amuse yourself by producing in him the peculiar kind of clarity which hell affords. I have been writing to you under the assumption that the people in the next row provide no grounds for disappointment. Of course they do. And provided your patient knows that the woman in the absurd dress is an online fool or the man with a mullet is a creeper and a drunk, then our business is so much easier. And all you have to then do is keep out of his mind the question.
I, being what I am, can be a Christian, then why should the people in the next row be any different?
At bottom, he still believes he has run up a very favorable credit balance in the enemy's ledger by allowing himself to be converted, and thinks he is showing great humility and condescension by allowing himself to go to church with these smug, commonplace neighbors at all. Keep him in that state of mind as long as you possibly can. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. My dear Wormwood, I am very pleased by what you tell me about this man's relationship with his mother, but you want to press your advantage. The enemy will be working from the center outward, gradually changing your patient's heart, and may reach his behavior to the old lady at any moment. To accomplish this, build up in that house a good, settled habit of daily annoyance and mutual pinpricks. The following methods are useful. First, keep his mind on the real life. He thinks becoming a Christian is something inside him. Encourage this. Keep his mind off the most elementary duties by directing it to only the most advanced and spiritual ones. Move him into a mindset where he can practice self-examination for 1 hour without realizing any of those facts which are perfectly clear to anyone who has sat with him at lunch. Second, it is no doubt impossible for us to prevent him praying for his mother. But we have ways of rendering those prayers harmless. Make sure that they are always very spiritual. They should always be concerned with the safety of her soul and never her rheumatism, finances, or friendships. 2 advantages follow. In the first place, his mind will be kept on what he regards as her sins, and by which he can be moved to mean any of her behaviors which he finds inconvenient or irritating. In the second place, since his ideas about her soul will be quite crude, he will in some degree be praying for an imaginary person, and in no time, no thought or feeling in prayer for the imagined mother will flow into his treatment of the real one. I have had patients of my own so well in hand that they could be turned at a moment's notice from an impassioned thought or prayer for a wife or son's soul to beating and insulting the actual wife and son without qualm. Third, when 2 people have lived together a very long time, it is certain that each of them has tones of voice or expressions of face that are almost unendurably irritating to the other. Work on that. Highlight the lift of the mother's eyebrow, which he learned to dislike in the nursery, and let him think about how much he dislikes it. Let him assume she knows how annoying this is and does it to annoy. And if you know your job, he will not realize the unlikelihood of the assumption. Oh, and above all, never let him realize he has tones or expressions which similarly annoy her. As the man cannot see or hear himself, this will be easily accomplished. Fourth, in civilized life, domestic hatred usually expresses itself by saying things which appear quite harmless on paper.
Have you found a job yet?
Oh, but at such a moment or at such a time when they are not far short of a blow to the face, encourage this game of double standards as much as you possibly can. Your man must be encouraged to interpret all of his mother's utterances with the fullest and most interpretation of her tone and suspected intent. She should be encouraged to do the same to him so that after every argument, they both go away quite convinced that they are both innocent. You know the sort of thing.
I simply ask him what time dinner is, and he flies into a temper.
Now, you will say that these are very small sins, and no doubt be anxious to report, like all young tempters, spectacular wickedness. But do remember the only thing that matters is the degree to which we separate the man from the enemy. It doesn't matter the size of the sins, provided their cumulative effect is to push the patient further out of the light and further into the darkness. Murder is no better than gossip, if gossip can do the trick. Indeed, the safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. My dear Wormwood, you will notice that nothing throws your man into a passion quite as easily as having a tract of time he reckoned on having at his own disposal unexpectedly taken from him. Men are not angered by mere misfortune, but by misfortune perceived as injury. It is the unexpected visitor turning up when he looked forward to a quiet evening, or the friend's talkative wife. That really throw him out of gear.
I wasn't doing anything, so I thought I'd come too.
Now, he is not yet so slothful or uncourteous that these simple demands on his time are in and of themselves too much. They annoy him because he regards his time as his own and feels as though it is being taken from him. You must zealously guard in your patient's mind the curious assumption, my time is my own. Let him think that he begins each day as the rightful possessor of 24 hours, that his time is in some mysterious sense his own personal birthright. You have a difficult task ahead of you. Men cannot make nor retain a single moment of time. They come to him as if by pure gift. He might as well regard the sun and the moon as his chattels. He has also, in theory, committed himself to the service of the enemy. And if the enemy were to appear before him in human form and demand that full service, even for one day, your man would not refuse. And he would be delighted if that day involved nothing harder than listening to the conversation of a foolish woman. A general sense of ownership is to always be encouraged. Humans are always putting up claims to ownership, which sound equally as funny in heaven and in hell. Oh, and we must keep them doing so. We produce this sense of ownership not only by pride, but by confusion. Teach him not to notice the finely graded line that runs from my boots to my dog to my servant,
My wife.
to my father, my master, my country, and finally,
My God.
they can be taught to reduce all of this to that of my boots, the my of ownership. Even a child in a nursery can be taught to mean by my teddy bear not the special gift that I enjoy, but my bear that I can pull to pieces whenever I'd like. In the long run, either our Father below or the enemy hopes to say mine of every creature, and especially every man. They will find out, in the end, to whom their time really belongs. Rest assured, it is not to themselves. The enemy hopes to say mine on the pedantic and legalistic ground that he made it, and will one day, through grace, transform it into an offensive banality, while our Father hopes to say mine on the very real and dynamic grounds of conquest. Your affectionate Uncle Screwtape. My dear Wormwood, so, your man is in love. And in the worst kind he could have fallen into, with a girl who doesn't even appear in the report that you sent me. I have looked through this girl's dossier and am horrified by what I find. Not only a Christian, but a vile, sneaking, simpering, demure, mouse-like, monosyllabic, virginal bread and butter miss, the little brute. She makes me vomit. It drives me mad the way the world has worsened. We'd have had her to the arena in the old days. Not that she'd do much good there. A two-faced little cheat in every way. I know the sort. Looks as if she'd faint at the sight of blood and yet dies with a smile. A cheat in every way. Looks like butter wouldn't melt in her mouth and yet has a satirical wit. The kind of creature who'd find me funny, filthy, insipid little prude, and yet ready to fall into this idiot's arms like any other breeding animal. Why doesn't the enemy blast her for it if he's so moonstruck by virginity instead of looking on there grinning? He's a hedonist at heart. He has filled his world full of pleasures for the people to enjoy without his minding in the slightest. Eating, drinking, washing, playing, praying, making love, and everything has to be twisted before it is of any use to us. We fight under cruel disadvantages, Wormwood. Nothing is naturally on our side. And then the patient gets to meet this woman's family. and whole circle. Could you not see that the very house she lives in is one he should have never entered? The whole place reeks of that revolting odor, and we are certain that each one of them is making profit off of the other, but we cannot find out how. They guard almost as secretly as the enemy the secret of what goes on behind this pretense of disinterested love. The whole house and even the garden are one vast obscenity. Bears a sickening resemblance to the description one human writer made of heaven.
The regions where there is life and all that is not music is silence.
Music and silence. How I detest them both. Let us be thankful that ever since our Father below entered hell, no square inch of infernal space nor moment of infernal time has been surrendered to either of those abominable forces, and yet all has been occupied by noise. Noise, the audible expression of all that is ruthless, virile, and exultant. We shall make the entire universe a noise in the end. We will shout down the very melodies and silences of heaven, and there are only pockets left, but we are not yet loud enough, nor anything like it. In the meantime, I have enclosed a booklet on the new House of Corrections for incompetent tempters. It is profusely illustrated, and you will not find a dull page in it. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. My dear Wormwood, it seems to me you take a great many pages to tell a simple story. The long and short of it is that you have allowed the man to slip through your fingers. The situation is very grave, and I see no reason to shield you from the consequences of your actions. Your blunders are clear. Of your own showing, you have allowed the man to read a book that he really enjoyed, and because he enjoys it, not to make clever remarks about it with his friends. And in the second place, you have allowed him to take a walk down to the mill and have tea there, a walk in the country, something he really enjoys. So, in other words, you have provided him two very real pleasures. Were you not so ignorant as to realize the dangers of this? Pains and pleasures are unmistakably real and provide the man who feels them with a touchstone of reality. In order to separate the man from the enemy, you must first separate the man from himself. And you had made some progress in doing this, but now that is all undone. Do remember that the enemy wants to detach them from themselves too, but in a different way. He really likes the little vermin and sets an absurd value on the distinctness of each of them. I would make it a habit to eradicate from my patient any strong personal preference that is not a sin, even if it is something as simple as a fondness for baseball or collecting bottle caps or drinking cocoa. Such things, I grant you, have nothing of virtue in them, but there is a sort of humility and innocence and self-forgetfulness about them which I distrust. Any man who enjoys anything in this world for itself without caring a nickel what anyone else thinks is by that very fact better armed against some of our strongest modes of attack.
Would you like some etouffee?
I have known a human defended from such strong personal ambitions to a still stronger ambition for pizza and cheap beer.
You got any potato chips?
It remains to be seen how we can retrieve this situation. The best thing is to keep him from doing anything. No amount of piety in his imagination or affections will harm us if we keep it out of his will. Bring us back food, or be food yourself. Your affectionate Uncle Screwtape. My dear Wormwood, you tell me that you are delirious with joy that the humans have started another one of their wars. I see very clearly what has happened to you. You are not delirious, you are drunk. You tell me with glee that there is reason to expect heavy air raids in the town where your man lives. I sometimes wonder if you think you have been sent into the world for your own amusement. Do you not realize bombs kill men? Remember, the enemy's human partisans have been clearly told by him that suffering is an essential part of what he calls redemption. The enemy really does want to fill the world with a lot of loathsome little replicas of himself, creatures whose lives, in a minuscule sense, are that of his own, not because he has absorbed them, but because their wills are free. We want cattle who can finally become food. He wants servants who can finally become sons. We want to suck in. He wants to give out. We are empty and would be filled. He is full and runs over. We desire a world in which our Father below has drawn all other beings into himself. The enemy wants a world in which all beings are united to him, but still distinct. Of course, war is entertaining, but due to the enemy's barbarous terms of warfare, he allows us only a brief glimpse of the suffering of his favorites to torment and torture us, to mock our incessant hunger. Let us therefore think how we can use this war.
Where's your God in all of this?
You might ask why he doesn't make more of his power to be sensibly present in the souls of every human being, but now you see that the indisputable and the indisputable are methods by which his scheme cannot allow him to attain. Merely to override a human will in any such situation, finite enough as to certainly do the trick, would not work. He cannot ravish, he can only woo. Merely to assimilate them would not serve. He allows them to stand up on their own legs and carry out from will alone tasks that have lost all of their relish. It is in such trough periods, not peak periods, that the patient is becoming the kind of creature the enemy desires him to be. He cannot tempt to virtue. He merely desires them to walk and therefore must take away his hands, and if the desire to walk is strong enough, he is pleased by even their stumbles. Do not misunderstand me, Wormwood. The situation is never more grave than when a human being looking around the universe, no longer desiring but intending to do the work of the enemy, asks why he has been forsaken and still obeys. Cowardice and duplicity are your target, not fear. Your affectionate Uncle Screwtape. My dear, my very dear Wormwood, my poppet, my Pigsney, you have let a soul slip through your fingers. How well I know what happened at the instant when they snatched him from you. There was a sudden clearing of his eyes as he saw you for the first time and recognized the part you had had in him and knew that you had it no longer. Let it be the beginning of your agony, what he felt at that moment, as if a scab had fallen off from an old sore, as if he'd shuffled off for good and all a defiled, wet, clinging garment. What then of this final stripping, this complete cleansing? The more one thinks about it, the worse it becomes. Your man got through so easily. No doctor's sentence, no nursing home, no false hopes of life, sheer instantaneous liberation. One moment it seemed to be all our world, the scream of bombs, the fall of houses, the heart cold with horrors. Next moment, all of this was gone. Defeated, outmaneuvered fool. Did you mark how naturally, as if he'd been born for it, the earth-born vermin entered the new life? How all of his doubts became, in the twinkling of an eye, ridiculous. I know what the creature was saying to itself.
Yes, of course. It always was like this.
As he saw you, he also saw them. I know how it was. You reeled back dizzy and blinded, more hurt by them than he had ever been by bombs. The degradation of it, that this thing of earth and slime could stand upright and converse with spirits. Perhaps you had hoped that the awe and strangeness of it would dash his joy, but that is the cursed thing. The gods are strange to mortal eyes, and yet they are not strange. He had no faintest conception till that very hour of how they would look, and even doubted their existence. But when he saw them, he knew that he had always known them, so that now he could say to them, one by one, not "Who are you?" but
So it was you, all the time.
he saw not only them, he saw him. This animal, this thing begotten in a bed, could look on him. What is blinding, suffocating fire to you is now cool light to him, is clarity itself, and wears the form of a man. Sometimes I am almost in despair. But I do have you. How unfortunate that now that all is lost, you come whimpering back to ask me if the affection I spoke to you with at the beginning meant nothing. Far from it. I have always loved you, and you have always loved me. Our love is like two peas. The difference is that I am the stronger. I think they will give you to me now, or at least a bit of you, love you. Yes, your increasingly ravenous and affectionate Uncle Screwtape.